example. And also there are other arguments for the existence of God. For example, the moral argument. My time's up.
Okay, so we're going to have a 30-minute question and answer session. Each speaker will have a chance to respond. If the questioner could please pose their question to a specific speaker, and then the other speaker can then respond afterwards. I'd like to remind you that it's a question, not a lecture. If the speaker will have no more than 30 seconds to 1 minute to ask their question, and the speakers will have about 2 minutes each to respond. So, could I see a raise of hands of anyone who would like to ask a question, please? Okay, this gentleman here.
Thanks. Firstly, thanks for coming to the university, it's really good. I have a question about the logic you used, Adam, regarding the small bangs versus big bangs. It seems to me that small bangs are caused within the universe, but the Big Bang is the universe. So the comparison was a little wrong. I feel that your logic is a little flawed, that you're lumping them together within the same set.
The analogy with the little bang and the big bang was more of a rhetorical device. Not to take it too seriously. But the point is that what we know is that whatever, this is not a, the first principle is whatever begins to exist means a cause. It's not a physical principle. It is a metaphysical. It applies to all aspects of reality. And it's based upon the idea that being does not come from non-being.
Well, that's nonsense.
Pause. Alright, no. And this was the cause of that outburst. But go ahead.
I think it's metaphysical, and you can't allow it at all, because metaphysics is just speculation. So don't treat any metaphysical truth as a truth. Treat it as a possible lie. Secondly, it is extremely important to distinguish the state of absolutely nothing from the state of, say, a perfect vacuum, as I'm sure you would also accept. A perfect vacuum has got laws, and physics occurs within that arena. But when there was absolutely nothing, there were, as you originally said, no laws at all, so there was no causality. So what we've got to think about is whether an acausal event can occur, but when the universe was becoming initiated. So you can't extend the notion of causality, which is our experience of this universe, to whatever happened at the inception of this universe.
Right. Can I come back on?
Yes, okay, we're going to have a discussion anyway.
Sure. Now, he's asking to say I can call him, well, he said I can call him Peter, by the way. So, Peter said here that these are lies. We're talking about metaphysical claims. But if metaphysical claims are lies, then his alternative to the Planetarian would also be a lie, because the postulate a multiverse is pure metaphysics, as I mentioned before. So that alternative would be a lie in itself. But so, yeah, the point is, according to your standard, it would be a lie. I don't think metaphysics is a lie. There are many metaphysical claims. For example, everything that has a shape has to have a size. Something can't be red and green all over at the same time. No event precedes itself. These are metaphysical claims. These are true in and of themselves. So I don't see how they're lies. Now, he's also mentioned about the vacuum. But this is, again, this analogy. The vacuum, as Professor Peter has described it, is a realm of physicality, physical laws, and has a vibrancy of energy within this vacuum. But again, I stress, when we say that the universe can come into existence uncaused, there is literally nothing, absolutely nothing whatsoever, and then we think that the universe just pops into existence. I mean, to believe that is just worse than hocus pocus. Look, David Blaine, when he performs a magic trick and he brings out a pack of cards in his palm or his hand, Peter's a David Blaine. What Peter's saying, advocating, there's no David Blaine, the black God just appears. Just like magic. This is absurd. Now, and to cite the objection where to present to ask what caused the Big Bang as being a sort of a pseudo problem is false. Why? Because if something cannot come into existence during time, uncaused, then why would it come into existence uncaused at the beginning of time? If something cannot come into existence uncaused, where we have t, as in time, and earlier moments, then we eradicate earlier moments of time, and then we say it can come into existence uncaused at t0. Why would that? What is the relevant difference there? Why would it come into existence uncaused at the beginning of the universe if it cannot come something cannot come into existence uncaused during time? And note, look at time. Oh, sorry, have I gone over my time? Yeah. Sorry. So can I just conclude? Just wrap up. The problems. It's a genuine problem. We can ask. The principle is a metaphysical. It's true. You can't just assert and say, well, no, we don't accept that. You have to give arguments for why we should accept that whatever begins to exist is cause.
I think that is asserting that something cannot come from absolutely nothing. That's basically, that's part of the statement. That's what it's. Okay, so what's here? Let's assess what is present in the universe. Is there any electric charge? Yes, of course there's electric charge. But there is positive charge and there is its opposite, negative charge. And there is experimental evidence that the total amount of electric charge in the universe is absolutely zero. So what happened in the creation was, as it were, not the creation of electric charge, but the separation of, let's call it nothing, into opposites. You can see how science simplifies the description of what goes on at the beginning. There's obviously a lot of energy in the universe. And you look at around you, but you can measure the amount of energy that's in the universe to judge how much had to come from absolutely nothing on that day zero. And you do it as follows. You take a galaxy, you determine its mass, you do that. You multiply it by c squared, and that gives you, for E equals mc squared, the energy that mass represents. And then you add up that energy for all the galaxies in the universe. And obviously you get a seriously big amount of energy. But unlike philosophers, scientists are circumcised people. And they say, well, wait a minute. There's another kind of energy. There's the potential energy of attraction between galaxies. And whenever you have attraction, you lower the energy. And the experimental suspicion of the moment, suspicion, and I also say experimental because you can measure these things, is that the lowering energy caused by the gravitational attraction between all the galaxies in the universe exactly cancels that E equals mc squared something originally. So the answer to the question, how much energy is there in the universe, is that there is zero energy. So how much energy had to come from nothing on the first day? And the answer is none. And that, although it does not completely answer the problem of the inception of the universe and the questions of causality and all that sort of thing, shows how science simplifies what has to be answered. There is, in a sense, and this is almost a metaphysical statement, nothing here. And it's easy to understand how nothing indeed comes from nothing.
Okay. We'll now move on to our next question. Bob there had his hand up first. If you can keep it brief, please. Thank you.
Professor Atkins, I have to say, as a scientist, a practical scientist, so I can understand your argument. While I didn't invest much of my limited gray matter in trying to understand philosophy or its underlying arguments. But what I noticed that the number of no and nothing I hear today is very highly concentrated, to the degree that I believe that who described that you, Professor Nothing, was a little bit accurate. He warned me about this before coming. I have three questions to you. The first question, are we created from nothing? Or are you the creator of yourself? Or are you the creator of the heavens and earth?
What was the last one?
3 questions.
The last question.
Or you are the creators, or humans are the creators of heavens and earth, or the universe, or the multiverse.
Okay, thank you. These are the ones.
Well, I think there are superficial answers. I think there are superficial answers, and there are deep answers. I will just give the superficial one. I'm a creator of nothing. I'm simply the investigator of what there is. And I, through the scientific method, which I will not let slip in this discussion, I am discovering the nature of physical reality. And because there is no evidence for the existence of reality beyond the physical, I consider that science is capable of investigating all that there is.
I agree with you that we are halfway, because you actually answered the first half of my testimony. You said there is no God. And I also believe that there is no God but Allah, the creator of you and me, the creators of heaven and earth, the one who was before the start and before the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is going to be after the end of it, he is after that as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sorry,
Adam is now.
just to comment on the idea that nothing is here. I mean, if we're going to have a serious discussion, let's not trivialize the question at hand. I mean, to assert that there's nothing here is a bit silly. Look, even when you say there is positive energy and there's negative energy, there is still something there. And the question is, how did that positive energy and negative energy come from nothing? You can't sidestep the question. The question is there. No matter how you redefine the reality, it's still going to be there, because you're still talking about reality. Even to say zero energy itself is evident, because you're talking about energy. Even if it's at zero, there's still something there. So this question is still there.
I totally agree with you, Adam, but what I was trying to show is that whereas I think you, before you came through those doors this evening, thought that it was a jolly difficult problem explaining the creation, because so much had to be made, I have suggested that you are deluded, and that, in fact, there's not nearly as much to explain as you originally thought. And the scientific procedure is to simplify the approach to answering questions, but without destroying their function.
Adam, do you have anything else to say before?
That's fine.
Okay. If we could have, the next brother there then, and then we'll move on to the brother at the back there. Could you keep?
My question is for Peter. Peter, because you are talking about the evidence and the human reason, so do you believe in history? And if you believe in history, then there are 2 questions. That do you believe in rediscovery of human knowledge? Because even in the past, there is evidence that the human beings were at the top of the science. And if you believe that, even the past civilizations, despite by having competence and at the peak of their science knowledge, they were believing the God or gods. So it doesn't mean that if you are on the peak of your knowledge, you don't believe God. I say, because we are in rediscovery of knowledge, and the past civilizations were more scientific and more progressive than us, and still they were believing the gods. How you can say that the progress of the wisdom don't believe God?
Okay, thank you. Peter, would you like to respond?
Well, I think the evidence of all those aircraft which were built out of flint certainly encourages to believe that people have a very advanced technology.
Adam, would you like to respond to this? The brother at the back there, and then this gentleman here as well. If you could keep your question brief, please. Thank you.
We need to make it sure that science is the right standard to answer this question, which is the topic of today's debate. I mean, being a scientist, if we want to measure the temperature, we have to have a temperature gauge rather than the pressure gauge. All the religions have defined physical, that is the body, and the soul, spiritual. Without having these 2 standards together, we cannot cannot answer the question, which is the debate up to date.
Okay, thank you very much. The question was, we haven't got the answer about these two together, then we will not be able to answer this question. Is that correct?
Around this time.
At this time?
Well, I don't believe we solved.
Only with science, we have to have incorporated the concept of soul, which has been defined by the religion, all the religions, as the concept of God is religious, not scientific. So we have to have a measuring standard to answer this question, not based on the scientific knowledge, but it should be incorporated with the soul as well.
Well, if I understand the direction of the question, I think I would say that there is no evidence of the existence of a soul. There is evidence of the existence of a human spirit, which is rather different, which is the urge to achieve, if you like, and the urge to understand, a kind of, which is just an aspect of the workings of the brain. Insofar as science can investigate the nature of what you assert to be the soul, then I leave that to the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the anthropologists who can investigate such delusions.
And do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think we can argue that there is no evidence for a soul, but if we understand the soul to be something immaterial, I think we do have some good reasons to believe it immaterial. For example, we know of ourselves immaterial beings. For example, when I say, I'm sad, you don't say my brain is sad, you say I'm sad. And to believe in the immaterial resolves issues to do with self-identity over time, and also the problem of free will. Those things wouldn't exist if all that we are material beings, then physicalism would be true, that all we are is just a matter of atoms.
But there's no evidence that there's anything else other than atoms. It's a kind of miasma in some way.
Well, if there's no evidence, then Peter, you would have to deny self-identity over time and free will.
That's nonsense. I'm a sentient being. I know that I'm currently alive. Might not be out at sea.
You would have to. You would also have to deny the fact that you're a rational being. Why? Because if all that you are is just atoms, physicality, your ideas are part of that physicality.
Yeah,
so
I understand the actual ideas.
And your behaviour.
Currents in the brain.
Currents, but who has the currents?
I have.
Whose eyes? The currents? Your hand, your foot?
Spongy aspects of my intuition.
Now, going back to my point of being irrational, if physicalism is true, then all of your behaviour is a result of your DNA. So,
no, absolutely not. Well, I think upbringing and environment has an impact on it.
Which it has an
expression.
But the only way that you can manifest a certain behaviour in upbringing is a result of your DNA. You can't act outside of your DNA. Yeah. So that would mean that your idea of atheism and even evolution and naturalism is all part of your DNA makeup. Your belief.
That's an exaggeration.
It follows logically. It follows logically.
All of it.
No, of course, but your very behaviour now, and even your ideas, are part of your DNA. So
no. I mean, ideas are part of DNA.
Well,
I read that the way that I think and the way that I can think, and that is an aspect of my genetic composition.
Yes.
In alliance or sometimes in enmity with my upbringing and my environment. But it's not.
Could you explain to me, Peter, how you can rescue the notion of free will by being a materialist or an atheist?
Yeah, absolutely. That's easy enough. I mean, the brain is such a complex entity that it's very difficult to predict the outcome from a given input. And that effectively is what we mean by free will.
Okay. Adam, do you want to respond to that?
Well, the only thing, I don't find that very persuasive. I'll simplify it. If we're just physical beings, we're just made of matter, then we can only behave according to the natural laws. For example, a rock rolling down a hill doesn't have a choice, it has to obey the laws of gravity. In the same way, if we're just physical beings, we're just behaving according to the laws is that what is it about us that makes that decision if it's outside of our
It's the
DNA?
unpredictability of it. I mean, you know, for example, take a double pendulum, which is one pendulum hanging from another pendulum. We know exactly the laws of mechanics that this device obeys, but it is impossible to predict what the two angles will be after a brief interval because of the chaotic behaviour of such a system. But now, your brain is more complicated than a double pendulum.
Absolutely.
And so the input is wholly impossible to predict.
Look, earlier you said there's nothing special about us. But if we're just physical beings and everything is determined by natural law, then our behaviour, our thoughts are just products of natural law. Why are we any different?
Different from what? From each other?
From any other physical thing that exists in the world.
Because we're so complicated. We're so complex. I mean, we're this thing inside our
But
heads
even
is
if we're
such an
complicated,
amazing device that it takes inputs from all our senses.
what I'm saying is, even though it's complicated, it's still physical.
You're there.
But why would we behave differently than anything else that's physical?
Because other things, this chair is not as complex as a brain.
Yeah.
So when they speak at it, it doesn't answer back.
Yes.
Whereas you are fairly complex, not very complex.
Yes.
Let's move on to the next question. I did say we're going to give it to this brother here, and then we'll give it to that one there. So, if you wouldn't mind speaking.
Thank Peter and Adam for giving us your time. My question to Peter is, as I understood from your talk today, is science cannot prove everything, but can offer us observation, and if the problem cannot be solved now, we solve it perhaps in the future, we find the evidence and proof. The problem that have evidence that God does not exist, why we don't take it as a scientific problem? We cannot prove now there is no God. Why don't use the scientific approach? Okay, we cannot prove now there is no God, but perhaps using the scientific approach in the future we could prove there is a God. Why straight away he make conclusion and he didn't follow the scientific approach and said we leave it to the future, we might find the answer then.
Do you believe in leprechauns?
Yes, absolutely.
Second one's in effect.
But you see,
Okay.
do you believe, I mean, just to quote a famous saying from Bertrand Russell, that if I were to propose that there is a teapot in orbit between the Earth and Mars, should I go out looking for it? Now, it seems to me that God is a teapot.
Why make the conclusion, why you are certain to this problem, you became very certain.
Yeah.
Well, other problems, he said, okay, we leave the scientists, perhaps I cannot find the answer now, the future will find it for me.
But I've
But
never
in
seen,
this
I've never
particular
seen,
issue, he made his conclusion and said, yes,
but I've never seen any evidence for it.
How come?
And I've never seen any evidence for a teapot in orbit. And I've never seen any evidence for God.
How
So
can
you
you
might,
future you cannot see it?
Okay, Adam, would you like to?
Yeah. Okay. See, to compare God to a leprechaun is false. Because, firstly, the reason we don't believe in leprechauns is because we have evidence against them. Sorry about that. But well, we do, because they defy the laws of gravity, physics. That's why we don't believe in leprechauns or Father Christmas.
you don't know how leprechauns behave.
Well, if you can think of a leprechaun that bounces up and down, just go with me here.
The final or make it short.
And the reason, the gentleman here is touched on a very important point, and if we go back to those two assumptions that I think that Peter Atkins absorbs into his understanding of science, and that's scientism and naturalism. There can never be evidence for him. There can never be some kind of demonstration that God exists. Why? Because he believes that everything that is true, according to his own statements about truth, is provable by science. And he already believes that naturalism is true, that all that exists in the natural world, there's nothing like God, there is no God. So whatever evidence you bring to Peter, he's never going to accept it because of those adults. But we've already established that they're just adults, and they need to be justified.
Okay, could we move on to the next question?
There's a final question, please.
We only have one question to speak.
Very short, yeah?
So I think
there's other people here that want to further questions, so you've already answered one. Could we pass it to Anthony? Could you keep your question brief, please? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the debate. My question is for Professor. How does an atheist determine what is moral or immoral, right or wrong? Is there any objective standard or principle?
Thank you for your question. Peter?
Well, do I have a moral code? That's the question. The origins of my moral code are rather complex. I do have one, which I will come to in a moment. But the origins of my moral code are my evolutionary history, as I said in the presentation, in the rebuttal, allied with my ability to think about the consequences of my actions, which distinguishes me from brute animals and caterpillars. But those lead me to what I do regard as my moral code, which is not to thwart the aspirations of others. And I think that works pretty well. Now, I know that I'm not going to get rewarded in heaven because I don't believe in any aspect of afterlife. So maybe I'm a little bit better than people who are behaving well because they expect to be rewarded in an afterlife. But I don't expect reward, but I do expect that everyone around me behaves in the same reciprocal way, in the way that I think I will behave to them, maybe not thwarting their aspirations. Now, of course, there comes a point where you have to draw a line. I would have no hesitation in thwarting the aspirations of Adolf Hitler, for example. So, but those are judgments that are at the extremes of society.
Okay, Adam, if you could also respond before we move on to the next question, please.
Yeah, Peter mentioned Adolf Hitler, which follows from that. He's referring to obviously his crimes of the Nazi Germans and the Holocaust. But I find it very hard to establish that there is such a thing as objective morality, that there is an objective evil. If God does not exist, then all we are just advanced primates. That's all we are. We are an accident. Again, Peter said that there's nothing special about us. And I agree, if God does not exist, there's nothing special about us. So then the question is, if there's nothing special about us, then why would we suddenly start introducing good and evil, right and wrong? If we go back to the history of the cosmos, where we have these particles coming into existence uncaused, I don't believe that's what Peter does, and then these particles, they form galaxies and then planets, and then one planet has the necessary and sufficient conditions for the existence of intelligent life, and then we have life existing and then evolving, and then we have these Homo sapiens coming, evolving. And then suddenly, with their arrival, we have good and evil.
Yeah, but that's because we live in societies.
Okay, but that would be a contrived understanding of morality. When you talk about morality, that is objectively right and wrong. If we rewind the history of evolution, we might have completely different beings.
Yeah, if we were dinosaurs, then we might indeed, reptiles, let's say, rather than mammals,
yes.
Then indeed we might find that eating every third egg might be very appropriate. Whereas we draw the line of eating every third child.
Okay, well, going back to my story of how the universe evolved and we have these beings, sentient beings that you're talking about. And Hume spoke about this, that what you're doing is by looking at societies and how societies are benefited by human behavior, you are deriving an ought from an is. And that is an old problem. How do you derive an ought from an is? Because an ought presupposes that there is such thing as objective morality, and to say, oh, that's an ought. Or if you only believe in the material world, all you have is what is the case.
Yeah.
Like the question about testing on animals. Is it wrong to test on animals? That is an ethical question. The scientific understanding of that is how to test on animals. What is the best way to test on an animal to get the desired result? But that's an ethical question. How can you establish objective morality? There's nothing unique about human beings. There's nothing unique about anything about them. Michael Roos, for example, he said that what we consider to be, he's an atheist philosopher, he said what we consider to be morality is nothing more just an extension of our hands and feet and our teeth.
Well, that's not true. I think we are reflective beings. We think about the consequences of our actions. A hedgehog doesn't, a lion doesn't worry about the morality of killing a cheetah. It just does it. It doesn't reflect upon it. But we reflect upon imposing cruel actions onto things, and we withdraw from it because we consider it inappropriate.
How does it logically follow that just because we reflect on things that then objective morality exists?
I'm not saying that objective morality does exist.
People reflect that there is a God, but we don't say God exists. Simply because we reflect.
I'm saying that rules of behaviour have developed over the millennia in terms of early mammals, maybe even before mammals were king. Up to us, we started to live in elaborate societies and discovered other ways of behaving relative to our companions. I think the holy books, the Qur'an, the Bible, and so on, are really sort of handbooks to ways of behaving in complex societies. They are reflections on what ancient societies have discovered more or less works, and they've been written down. And that's what we currently rely on. There's no absolute objective morality. It's simply pragmatic morality.
Well, if it's to do with pragmatism, then it's dependent upon someone's culture or society. And one culture could not say to another culture that that was wrong or morally right or wrong. So hence, what that means is that we could not have, if that was true, which I don't think it is, that we could not charge the Nazis with war crimes because according to their culture, their society, that was perfectly acceptable. And also part of their survival and to meet their needs.
No, I think the world takes a consensus. I mean, because we think about not just the behaviour of individuals in the country, we think of the whole organisation of the world. So that's why it's right to scout up.
Consensus does not work here, Peter. The reason being is because when we speak about objective morality, it's true, valid and binding whether we believe in it or not.
You're talking about objective morality.
But you're talking about consensus. Yes, but consent does not work here. I'll tell you why. Because what if, for example, the whole world, again, what if the Nazis had won the Second World War and the whole world was full of Nazis and they exterminated anyone that disagreed with them? The whole world would agree that the Holocaust was wrong, according to your principles.
Absolutely.
And it would be right.
It's the case.
But then it would be right, according to that.
I'm afraid that's the case.
Okay, then, let's move on to the next question. Let's get on from this side of the room. Gentlemen here. Keep it brief, please.
My question is to the professor. You said the science proves everything. But does science proves why all these things exist, the natural things, and if the natural things have exist, why they are useful to the human being?
Well, I didn't actually say science proves everything. I actually said that the scientific method is a procedure that can be applied to everything, which is not what I said. I don't know what proof means in science, but I will take the thrust of your question, which is the why question, rather than the how question. Is that correct?
So, actually, we can invent the things, but we cannot create the things, like water.
Yes, you can.
How?
Out of hydrogen.
something, what's to stop me being defeatist and saying that anything could have made anything? So for example, I replace fairies or leprechauns or the teapot or something. Maybe not teapot in this situation, but I'm trying to prove the teapot exists. But in a defeatist approach, saying I can't prove it, therefore I'm going to believe in something that is unprovable. In that case, I replace something that I can't explain with God. Sorry, it's more of a statement rather than a question.
So are you saying that...
What's to stop me as a human from proving something I can't prove and replacing me not being able to prove it and just using any explanation?
If you have something which you cannot disprove, then from a theory of knowledge perspective, you would be agnostic about that. For example, someone might say that there is water of Mars. Now, I don't have any evidence to support that, but I don't have any evidence to say there is no water on Mars, so I would be agnostic about that. With respect to God, I've not just argued here that you cannot disprove God, therefore God exists. No, I've put positive arguments. What are the arguments that I put forward this evening? There are many, there are like 2,000 arguments for the existence of God, but I put that the best explanation of the origin of the universe is a transcendent cause, and that transcendent cause must be, by definition, outside of time and space. I've also shown there is an intelligent mind behind the universe, who is responsible for the delicate fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. So those are positive arguments. Now, in order to argue atheism that God does not exist, you have to do two things. First, knock down those arguments, and then provide a positive case why you believe that God does not exist.
That's not playing the game. If you make an assertion that God exists, then it's up to you to prove it. It's not up to me to disprove it. And also, I think taking up the tenor of your question, I think the assertion of a being that can do anything is a lazy assertion, because it means that you're copying out of answering the real question. Finding the mechanism, finding the process. So you're saying, we get back to pessimism again, because everything that Adam says is weighted heavily in terms of pessimism. Listen carefully, what he will say next. The pessimists, the religious, say that we'll never understand the lack of possibility of God. Whereas we scientists are optimists and say, give us a chance.
Peter keeps accusing me of being lazy, but I think it is Peter that is lazy. Socrates said you should follow where the evidence leads you. Peter's not coming along. All the evidence points that there is a transcendent cause, an intelligent mind outside the universe, but Peter doesn't want to move. He just wants to sit down and watch TV. So it is he who is being lazy. I want to follow where the evidence goes.
The world's scientists over decades, maybe centuries, to answer these extraordinary questions. And I want to arrive at an answer that I can comprehend.
Okay, let's move on to, we'll have two more questions. We've got someone here from my phone already, so you'd like to pose your question.
Hi there. I'd like to pose this question to both of the speakers. Natural selection is a theory that's often used in this debate, so to speak. What do the speakers make of recent advances in scientific literature which suggests that natural selection is good at explaining microevolution, which is the changes of certain features in given species when they vary from region to region geographically. But it says that it does not explain macroevolution, and most evolution is actually down to genetic drift or randomness. And now models of evolution and behavior are actually being drawn up using chaos mathematics. What do the speakers make of this?
Peter, do you want to go first?
Well, I think the underlying mechanism of evolution is natural selection, and that is the core. But there's lots of elaborations of it, and current thinking is finding elaborations. There's nothing that goes against the core idea that it is natural selection that
I think one is well within the epistemic right to doubt macro evolution, because there's a lot of evidence that accounts for the fact that it still needs some answers. But this view about evolution being somehow a champion of atheism is quite unfounded, because if we go back to the 14th century, Muslim philosopher like Ibn Khaldun, he writes, one should then look at the world of creation. It started out from minerals, progressed in an ingenious gradual manner to plants and animals, and that was 400 years before Darwin. So I think it's overhyped, this problem.
Okay. Final question. We'll actually take from the camera back. And then we'll have a conclusion from Andy and Peter Atkins.
Alright, thank you to both speakers for the thought-provoking presentation. My question is to Dr. Atkins, and forgive me if I sound a bit pessimistic, but even though we live in an age of jaw-dropping kind of scientific discovery and development, just as a primate has limited intellect and there's some things that are beyond its comprehension, do you not think it may be rational to think that we as human beings may reach one point in some time in the future where there are things that are just beyond our comprehension and that we will not be able to kind of explain, and thus science would not ultimately be able to lead us to atheism?
Well, it's certainly conceivable. I mean, it's it may be like trying to teach a dog general relativity, and it finds it just can't cope. But so far there is no evidence of that. And what is working in favour of infinite capacity is communication between brains, which is becoming more elaborate, more extensive, and enabling the groups collectively to make progress. It could be, I mean, it could be that our small brains limit the rate at which we comprehend, rather than what is comprehensible. One just doesn't know. But at the moment, like so many things in this discussion this evening, your pessimism lacks evidence at the moment.
Adam, do you have any comments to make on that? Okay, so now we'll proceed to the conclusions. Peter Atkins will have 5 minutes to conclude his take on the survey, and then Adam Lee will then conclude, and then we'll finish. Okay? Get the timer up. Try not to do 5 hours. Okay.
I don't think I want 5 minutes. Certainly don't want 5 hours. It really does come down, as I said in my rebuttal, to prejudice on the one hand and pessimism on the other. Prejudice because so many people are in the grip of cultural upbringing, brainwashing, if you like, that has led them to accept a religious mode of life, sometimes to their detriment, sometimes to other people's detriment, and sometimes to their own satisfaction and general happiness. But that religious way of life emerged from earlier centuries and gave birth in due course to the scientific method of collective, objective investigation, which I think is greatly superior than relying on any kind of authority, and superior to relying upon the reflections of the armchair scientists we call philosophers. People need to go out to see what the world is really like, rather than sitting down and reflecting upon what it is possibly like or could be like and things like that. That's what science does. Now, we've seen here this evening another battle, which was between the light and the dark, between optimism and pessimism. And we have seen a typical philosophical, theological position on imagination. What science has done is to really tries to dispel the gloom of the darkness of philosophy and theology, and to put in its place the prospect of understanding before you're dead, which is, I think, an important aspect of understanding. And I think all of us in the world are richer from the depth of understanding that is provided through the eyes of science. I think one should not be, if you are religious, you should not be fearful of what science exposes, because science will expose, and it's up to you to accommodate what it exposes. If you're not religious, then you should really take joy in the capacity of the human intellect to make progress. And I think that every time that science makes a little bit of progress, it chips away for the need to resort to that lazy explanation, the existence of a God who did it all and who is ultimately incomprehensible. So I hope that you'll go away feeling optimistic. If you go away feeling optimistic, then you're at least an inch closer to being atheists.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. So, if you recall in my opening speech, I said I would be defending 2 points. The first, that the proposition that claims that science is incompatible with theism is false, and that scientific evidence can be used to support theism. Now, going to the first point, I think it's evidently clear that there is no conflict, that there isn't any compatibility problems with being theist and doing science. Now, and I also argue that God provides a conceptual framework in which science can flourish. Earlier in Peter's opening speech, he said that the religious discoveries of science was accidental. I don't think it was accidental. I think it was precisely because they did believe in God. And the reason for that is that the medieval Muslim scientists, they were bounded by the inerrancy of the Qur'an. And when they came across verses talking about the day and night, about the humble origins of humanity, for example, talking about the embryonic stage, and when they were encountered with hadiths that said that God does not send a disease without a cure, and when they were when they realized that they had to pray 5 times a day, and they had to find mechanisms to help with that. All this was an impetus for scientific inquiry. Because they wanted to make sense of all of these claims by their religious scriptures, they regarded their scientific curiosity as a means to increase their devotion to God. So, believing in God provides a conceptual framework in which science can flourish, but in particular, the Muslim faith was an impetus for this quantum leap of scientific advancement. And this is all documented by a professor from this university, Professor Jim Al-Khalili. Very intriguing documentary on YouTube. I would recommend everyone to watch it, Science and Islam. It speaks about this in more detail. What else did I argue? I argued that the scientific evidence can support theism. And I gave 2 examples. I said that the transcendent cause is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. What did Peter say here? He said that science will be able to give us an explanation how something can come from nothing. But I explained earlier that that is impossible. That is outside of the remit of physics, because physics only works in the physical realm. I also argued that another evidence supports that there is something outside of the natural world, and that is that there is an intelligent mind responsible for the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. Here, Peter put forward the multiverse, and I showed you there's no evidence.
That was only one of four.
One of four. One of four. One of four. And Peter said that's one of four explanations for the fine-tuning of the universe. And I showed you, and that would be the best example, by the way. But I showed you there's no evidence for that, and also that example itself, that explanation would require a design. What we've heard, in a nutshell, is the claim that not believing in science to answer these questions is nothing more than pessimism. What I would say here is that we haven't seen pessimism, but we have seen stubbornness. That we have not followed where the evidence takes us. That is, that scientific evidence needs theism, not atheism. Thank you very much.